The BBC World Service is the world's largest international broadcaster, broadcasting radio and television news, speech and discussions in 29 languages to many parts of the world on analog and digital shortwave platforms, internet streaming, podcasting, satellite, FM and MW relays. It was announced in November 2015 that the BBC World Service will start broadcasting in Nigerian Pidgin and Yoruba in Nigeria. When this service starts, it will bring the total number of broadcast languages to 31. The World Service was reported to have reached 188 million people a week on average in June 2009. The English language service broadcasts 24 hours a day. The World Service is funded by the United Kingdom's television licence fee, limited advertising and the profits of BBC Worldwide Limited. The World Service was funded for decades by grant in aid through the Foreign and Commonwealth Office of the British Government until 1 April 2014. The director of the BBC World Service Group is Francesca Unsworth. The controller of BBC World Service, English, is Mary Hockaday. History. The BBC World Service began as the BBC Empire Service in 1932 as a shortwave service aimed principally at English speakers in the outposts of the British Empire. In his first Christmas message, King George V stated that the service was intended for men and women, so cut off by the snow, the desert, or the sea, that only voices out of the air can reach them. First hopes for the Empire Service were low. The Director General, Sir John Reith, said in the opening programme, "Don't expect too much in the early days. For some time we shall transmit comparatively simple programmes, to give the best chance of intelligible reception and provide evidence as to the type of material most suitable for the service in each zone. The programs will neither be very interesting nor very good." This address was read out 5 times as it was broadcast live to different parts of the world. On 3 January 1938, the first foreign language service, Arabic, was launched. German programs commenced on 29 March 1938 and by the end of 1942, broadcasts were being made in all major European languages. As a result, the Empire Service was renamed the BBC Overseas Service in November 1939, and a dedicated BBC European Service was added in 1941. These broadcasting services, financed not from the domestic licence fee but from government grant in aid, were known administratively as the external services of the BBC. The external services broadcast propaganda during the Second World War. Its French service Radio Londres also sent coded messages to the French resistance. George Orwell broadcast many news bulletins on the Eastern Service during World War II. By the end of the 1940s, the number of languages broadcast had expanded and reception had improved following the opening of a relay in modern-day Malaysia and of the Limassol relay, Cyprus, in 1957. On 1 May 1965, the service took its current name of BBC World Service, and the service itself expanded its reach with the opening of the Ascension Island relay in 1966. Serving African audiences with greater signal and reception, and the later relay on the island of Massawa. In August 1985, the service went off the air for the first time when workers struck in protest to the British government's decision to ban a documentary featuring an interview with Martin McGuinness of Sinn Féin. The external services were renamed under the BBC World Service brand in 1988. In recent years, financial pressures have decreased the number and type of services offered by the BBC. Due to the launch of internet-based services, the need for a radio station is less frequent in countries where the population has easy access to the internet news sites of the BBC. The German broadcasts were stopped in March 1999 after research showed that the majority of German listeners tuned into the English version of the service. broadcasts in Dutch, Finnish, French for Europe, Hebrew, Italian, Japanese and Malay were stopped for similar reasons. On 25 October 2005 it was announced that the Bulgarian, Croatian, Czech, Greek, Hungarian, Kazakh, Polish, Slovak, Slovene and Thai language radio services would end by March 2006 to finance the launch of an Arabic and Persian language TV news channel in 2007. Additionally, Romanian broadcasts ceased on 1 August 2008. More service closures came in January 2011 when the closing of 5 language services was announced as a result of the financial situation the corporation was facing following the eventual financial transfer of responsibility for the World Service from the Foreign Office to the BBC license fee. The Albanian, Macedonian, Portuguese for Africa, Serbian, and English for the Caribbean services were closed. The Russian, Ukrainian, Mandarin Chinese, Turkish, Vietnamese, Azari and Spanish for Cuba services ceased broadcasting a radio service, and the Hindi, Indonesian, Kyrgyz, Nepali, Swahili, Kinyarwanda and Kirundi services ceased transmission on the shortwave band. The British government announced that the 3 Balkan countries had luxuriant access to international information and continuation of broadcast in the local tongues had become unnecessary. 650 jobs went as part of the cuts and the service is facing a 16% budget cut. In March 2011, The Guardian published an article concerning an agreement between BBC Media Action and the US State Department, in which the latter would provide the charity with a low 6-figure sum so that new technology could be developed that would stop jamming and to educate people on how to avoid state censorship should they want to. However, the agreement has caused accusations that these measures would encourage a pro-American bias within the service and would help America win the information war. Operation. The BBC World Service broadcasts from Broadcasting House in London, headquarters of the corporation as a whole. The service is located in the new constructions of the building and contains radio and television studios for use by the several language services. The building also contains an integrated newsroom used by the International World Service, the international television channel BBC World News, the domestic television and radio BBC News Bulletins, the BBC News Channel and the BBC website service to the World Wide Web. Upon launch, the service was located, along with nearly all radio output, in Broadcasting House. However, following the explosion of a parachute mine outside the building on 8 December 1940, the services relocated to new premises away from the likely target of Broadcasting House. The overseas service relocated to premises in Oxford Street while the European service moved temporarily to the emergency broadcasting facilities at Maida Vale Studios. The European services moved permanently into Bush House towards the end of 1940, completing the move in 1941, with the overseas services joining them in 1958. Bush House subsequently became the home of the BBC World Service, and the building itself has gained a global reputation with the audience of the service. However, the building was vacated in 2012 as a result of the Broadcasting House changes and the end of the building's lease that year. The first service to move was the Burmese service on the 11th of March 2012, and the final broadcast was a news bulletin broadcast at 11:00 GMT on the 12th of July 2012. The BBC World Service is used to describe an English 24-hour global radio network and separate services in 27 languages. News and information is available on all these languages on the BBC website, with many having RSS feeds and specific versions for use on mobile phones, and some also using email notification of stories. In addition to the English service, 18 of the language services broadcast a radio service using the shortwave AM or the FM band. These programs are also available to listen live over the Internet. can be listened to again over the internet for 7 days or indefinitely in some cases, and, in the case of 7 language services, can be downloaded as podcasts. One can also listen to the news from the BBC News app, which is available on both iTunes and the Google Play Store. In recent years, video content has also been used by the World Service. 16 language services now show video reports in that language on the service's website, and 2 services now have dedicated television channels. BBC Arabic launched in 2008 and BBC Persian launched in 2009. Television services are also used to broadcast the radio service, with local cable and satellite television operators providing the English network and occasionally some local language services free to air on their services. The English language service is also available on digital radio in the UK and Europe. Traditionally, the BBC World Service relied on shortwave broadcasts because of its ability to overcome barriers of censorship, distance and spectrum scarcity. To this end, the BBC has maintained a worldwide network of shortwave relay stations since the 1940s, mainly in former British colonies. These cross-border broadcasts have also been used in special circumstances to broadcast emergency messages to British subjects abroad, such as the advice to evacuate Jordan during the Black September incidents of September 1970. These facilities were privatized in 1997 as Merlin Communications, which were later acquired and operated as part of a wider network for multiple broadcasters by VT Communications. It is also common for BBC programs to air on traditionally Voice of America or ORF transmitters, while their programming is relayed by a station physically located in the UK. However, since the 1980s, satellite distribution has made it possible for local stations to relay BBC programming. The World Service aims to be the world's best-known and most respected voice in international broadcasting, thereby bringing benefit to the UK, the BBC and to audiences around the world, while retaining a balanced British view of international developments. Like the rest of the BBC, the World Service is a Crown corporation of the UK government. Until 2014, unlike the rest of the corporation, which is funded through a television licence fee, the World Service was funded through a parliamentary grant in aid given by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. In 2008-9, the BBC World Service received 12.4% of the department's £2.2 billion budget, and in the financial year 2011-12, the service received £255.2 million from this grant. In addition to broadcasting, the BBC World Service also devotes resources to the BBC Learning English programme, which helps people learn English languages. In addition to the BBC World Service broadcasts in English, the service also provides services catering for 27 other languages. These are, of these languages, a television service operates for the Arabic and Persian languages, with a smaller service on IPTV for the Russian language. A radio service exists for 18 of the language services. The World Service has previously operated a number of different language services, targeted to different audiences. The table lists all of the current and former language services and when they operated. Radio programming in English. The World Service in English mainly broadcasts news and analysis programs. The mainstays of the current BBC World Service schedule are Newsday, World Update, NewsHour and The Newsroom. There are daily science programs, Health Check, the technology program Click and Science in Action. At the weekends, some of the schedule is taken up by Sports World, which often includes live commentary of Premier League football matches. Other weekend sports shows include the Sports Hour and Stumped, a cricket partnership with All India Radio and the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. On Sundays, the international, interdisciplinary discussion program The Forum is broadcast. On weekdays, an hour of the schedule is given over to World Have Your Say, which encourages listeners to participate in discussing current events via text message, phone calls, emails and blog postings. Outlook, a human interest program presented by Matthew Bannister and Joe Fidgen. It was first broadcast in July 1966 and presented for more than 30 years by John Tidmarsh. Regular music programs were reintroduced with the autumn schedule in 2015. Previous radio programming in English. Previously, other programming was broadcast including music programs, such as those presented by John Peel. Classical music programs presented by Edward Greenfield, religious programs with mostly Anglican celebrations, often from the Church of St. Martin in the Fields, weekly drama, educational programs such as English language lessons, and comedy, with programs such as Just a Minute. Other notable previous programs included Letter from America by Alistair Cook, which was broadcast for over 50 years, Off the Shelf, which featured a daily reading from a novel, biography or history book. Further examples of the broad range of programs for the audience can be seen through programs included A Jolly Good Show, a music request program presented by Dave Lee Travis, Wave Guide, a radio reception guide for listeners, the Merchant Navy program, a show for seafarers presented by Malcolm Billings. Since the late 1990s, the focus of the station has been as a news network, with news bulletins added every half hour following the outbreak of the Iraq War. News, the core feature of much World Service scheduling, is the news. This is almost always transmitted at 1 minute past the hour, where there is a 5-minute bulletin, and on the half hour where there is a 2-minute summary. Sometimes these bulletins are separated from the programs being transmitted, whilst at other times they are integral to the program. As part of the BBC's policy for breaking news, the BBC World Service is the first service to receive a full report for foreign news. The BBC World Service employs a team of 7 staff announcer newsreaders. The following relief newsreaders can also be heard on the network.